Shalom, welcome to Tactically Torah. I am Heath Hayes. Today is day 35 of Read the Bible in a Year. We are in Leviticus chapter 11. We're reading 11, 12, and 13. And we are on page 114 of the scriptures if you want to follow along. Let's just go ahead and dive in. All right. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the living creatures which you do eat among all the beasts that are on the earth. Whatever has a split hoof, completely divided, chewing the cud among the beasts, that you eat. Only these you do not eat among those that chew the cud or those that have a split hoof. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not have a split hoof, it is unclean to you. And the rabbit, because it chews the cud but does not have a split hoof, it is unclean to you. And the hare, because it chews the cud but it does not have a split hoof, it is unclean to you. And the pig, though it has a split hoof, completely divided, yet it does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Their flesh you do not eat, and their carcasses you do not touch. They are unclean to you. These you do eat of all that are in the waters. Any one that has fins and scales in the waters, in the seas or in the rivers, that you do eat. But all that do not have fins and scales in the seas and the rivers, that move in the waters, or any living being which is in the waters, they are an abomination to you. They are an abomination to you. Of their flesh you do not eat, and their carcasses you abominate. All that have not fins or scales in the waters are an abomination to you. And these you do abominate among the birds. They are not eaten, they are an abomination. The eagle and the vulture and the black vulture, and the hawk and the falcon after its kind, and every raven after its kind, and the ostrich and the night hawk and the seagull and the hawk after its kind, and the little owl and the fisher owl and the great owl and the white owl and the pelican and the carrion vulture, and the stork and the heron after its kind, and the hoopoe and the bat. All flying insects that creep on all fours is an abomination to you. Only these you do eat of, every flying insect that creeps on all fours, those which have jointed legs above their feet, with which to leap on the earth. These of them you do eat: the arbe locust after its kind, the solam locust after its kind, and the hargol locust after its kind, and the hagab locust after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet are an abomination to you, and by these you are made unclean. Anyone touching the carcass of any of them is unclean until evening. And anyone picking up part of the carcass of any of them has to wash his garments, and shall be unclean until evening. Every beast that has split hoof, not completely divided, or does not chew the cud is unclean to you. Anyone who touches their carcass is unclean. Whatever goes on its paws, among all the creatures that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. Anyone who touches their carcass is unclean until evening. And he who picks up their carcass has to wash his garments, and shall be unclean until evening. They are unclean to you. And these are unclean to you among the creeping creatures that creep on the earth: the mole, and the mouse, and the tortoise after its kind, and the gecko, and the land crocodile, and the sand reptile, and the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Anyone who touches them when they are dead becomes unclean until evening. And whatever any of them in its dead state falls upon becomes unclean. And whether it is any wooden object or garment or skin or sack, any object which work is done, it is put in water. And it shall be unclean until evening, then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, whatever is in it becomes unclean, and you break it. Any of the food which might be eaten on which water comes becomes unclean, and any drink which might be drunk from it becomes unclean. And on whatever any of their carcass falls becomes unclean. An oven or a cooking range, it is broken down, they are unclean, and are unclean to you. But a fountain or a well, a collection of water is clean, but whatever touches their carcass is unclean. And when any of their carcass falls on any planting seed which is to be sown, it is clean. But when any water is put on seed, and any part of any such carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. And when any of the beasts which are yours for food dies, he who touches its carcass becomes unclean until evening, and he who eats of its carcass has to wash his garments, and shall be unclean until evening. And he who picks up its carcass has to wash his garments, and shall be unclean until evening. And every swarming creature, the one that swarms on the earth, is an abomination and is not eaten. Whatever crawls on its stomach, and whatever goes on all fours, and whatever has many feet among all swarming creatures, you do not eat, for they are an abomination. Do not make yourselves abominable with any swarming creature. The one swarming, and do not make yourselves unclean with them, lest you be defiled by them. For I am Yahweh your Elohim, and you shall set yourselves apart, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. And do not defile yourselves with any swarming creature, the one creeping on the earth. For I am Yahweh, who is bringing you up out of the land of Mitzrayim, to be your Elohim, and you shall be set apart, for I am set apart. This is the Torah of the beasts and the birds and every living being, the creeping creature in the waters, and of every being that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living creature that is eaten and the living creature that is not eaten. Chapter 12. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, When a woman has conceived and has given birth to a male, then she shall be unclean 7 days, as in the days of her monthly separation she is unclean. And on the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin is circumcised, and she remains in the blood of her cleansing 33 days. She does not touch whatever is set apart, and she does not come into the set apart place until the days of her cleansing are completed. But if she gives birth to a female child, then she shall be unclean for 2 weeks as her monthly separation, and she remains in the blood of her cleansing for 66 days. And when the days of her cleansing are completed, for a son or for a daughter, she brings to the priest a lamb a year old as an ascending offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering to the door of the tent of appointment. And he shall bring it before Yahweh and make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the Torah for her who has given birth to a male or a female. And if she is not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, as one as an ascending offering and the other as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. Chapter 13. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it shall become on the skin of his body like a leprous infection, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of the sons of the priest, and the priest shall look at the infection of the skin of the body. If the hair on the infection is turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous infection. And the priest shall look at him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall shut up the infected one 7 days. And the priest shall look at him on the 7th day and see if the infection appears to be as it was, and the infection has not spread on the skin. Then the priest shall shut him up another 7 days. And the priest shall look at him again on the 7th day and see if the infection is darkened, and the infection is not spread on the skin. Then the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a scab, and he shall wash his garments and be clean. But if the scab spreads further over the skin, after he has been seen by the priest after his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And the priest shall look and see if the scab is spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When the infection of leprosy is on the man, then he shall be brought to the priest. And the priest shall look and see if the swelling is on the skin. It is white, and it is turned the hair white, and there is a spot of raw flesh in the swelling. It is an old leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He does not shut him up, for he is unclean. And if the leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and the leprosy shall cover all the skin of the affected one, from his head to his foot, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall look and see if the leprosy has covered all his body. He shall pronounce the infected one clean. It has turned white. He is clean. But the day raw flesh appears on him, he is unclean. And the priest shall look at the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean, and the raw flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. Or when the raw flesh changes and turns white again, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall look at him and see if the infection is turned white. Then the priest shall pronounce the infected one clean. He is clean. And when the body has a boil on the skin and it is healed, and in the place of the boil where comes a white swelling or a bright spot, reddish white, then it shall be seen by the priest. And the priest shall look on it, and if it appears to be deeper than the skin, and its hair is turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection which has broken out of the boil. But if the priest looks at it and sees no white hairs on it, and it is not deeper than the skin, but is faded, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And if he is spread further over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection. But if the bright spot stays in its place, it has not spread. It is the scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or when the body receives a burn on the skin by fire, and raw flesh of the burn shall become a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall look at it and see if the hair of the bright spot is turned white, and it appears to be deeper than the skin. It is leprosy broken out in the burn. And the priest shall pronounce him unclean, and it is a leprous infection. But if the priest looks at it and he sees there are no white hairs on the bright spot, and it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days, and the priest shall look at him on the 7th day. If it spreads further over the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous infection. But if the bright spot stays in its place and is not spread on the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn. And the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is a scar from the burn. And when a man or a woman has an infection on the head or in the beard, then the priest shall look at the infection and see if it appears deeper than the skin, and there is a thin yellow hair in it. Then the priest shall pronounce him unclean, and it is an eruption, a leprosy of the head or beard. But when the priest looks at the infection of the eruption and sees that it does not appear deeper than the skin, there is no black hair in it, and the priest shall shut up the one with the infection of the eruption 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall look at the infection and see if the eruption is not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, then the eruption does not appear deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, but the eruption he does not shave, and the priest shall shut up the one with the eruption another 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall look at the eruption and see if the eruption is not spread over the skin and does not appear deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. And he shall wash his garments, and he shall be clean. But if the eruption spreads over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look at him and see if the eruption has spread over the skin. The priest need not seek for yellow hair, he is unclean. But if the eruption appears to have stayed, and there is black hair grown up in it, the eruption has healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. And when a man or a woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, white bright spots, then the priest shall look and see if the bright spots on the skin of the body are dull white. It is a white spot that grows on the skin. He is clean. And when a man loses the hair of his head, he is bald. He is clean. And if the hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on the forehead. He is clean. And when there is on the bald head or a bald forehead a reddish white infection, it is leprosy breaking out on the bald head or his bald forehead. And the priest shall look at it and see if the swelling of the infection is reddish white on his bald head or on his bald forehead, that as the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean without fail. His infection is on his head. As for the leper who has the infection, his garments are torn, and his head is uncovered. And he has to cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. He is unclean all the days he has the infection. He is unclean. He is unclean, and he dwells alone. His dwelling place is outside the camp. And when a garment has an infection of leprosy in it, a woolen garment or a linen garment, or in the warp or in the weft of linen or wool, or in the leather or any leather work, and the infection shall be greenish or reddish in the garment, or in the leather, or in the warp, or in the weft, or in any leather object. It is an infection of leprosy, and shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall look at the infection and shut up the infected 7 days, and shall look at the infection on the 7th day. And when the infection has spread in the garment, or in the warp or the weft, or in the leather, or any leather work, the infection is an active leprosy. It is unclean. And he shall burn that garment or the warp or the weft in wool or in linen or any other object in which the infection is, for it is an act of leprosy. It is burned with fire. But if the priest looks and sees that the infection is not spread in the garment or in the warp or in the weft or in any leather object, then the priest shall give command, and they shall wash that in which the infection is, and he shall shut it up another 7 days. And the priest shall look at the infection after it has been washed, and see if the infection has not changed its appearance. Though the infection has not spread, it is unclean. Burn it with fire. It is eaten away, and it's in its inside or outside. And if the priest shall look and see the infection is faded after washing it, then he shall tear it out of the garment, or out of the warp, or out of the weft, or out of the leather. And if it is still seen in the garment, or in the warp, or the weft, or in any leather object, it is a spreading infection. Burn it with fire, that in which the infection is. But if you wash the garment, or the warp or the weft, or any leather object, if the infection has disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a second time, and shall be clean. This is the Torah of the infection of leprosy, in a garment of wool or linen, or in the warp or in the weft, or in any leather object, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. All right. Tomorrow we continue in chapter 14. Shalom.